Growing up, my family always took a camping trip every summer. It became a kind of tradition, and as I got older, I looked forward to it every year. We bounced between three places: Virginia Beach, Assateague Island, and this god-awful place called Westmoreland. While the latter was a bit of a dump, Assateague always stood out as our favorite. The beach was beautiful, the air was fresh, and the sense of isolation on that island made it feel like we were truly escaping from the world. But that summer, the trip to Assateague became a memory I would never forget. We had 2 tents set up that night, one for my parents and one for my brother and me. The tents were a good distance apart, but the whole campsite was surrounded by tall, wild grass and scrub bushes. Assateague was famous for its wild ponies that roamed freely across the island, but I never thought much about it at the time. I was just a kid, probably around 10 or 11, and I didn't think about much beyond the immediate, what we were doing right then. But that night, everything changed. The night started off calm, with a clear sky full of stars and a gentle breeze off the beach. I remember hearing the soft crashing of the waves in the distance, a lullaby of nature that made the air feel even more peaceful. We had just finished dinner, the campfire was burning low, and the faint scent of salt water hung in the air. We sat outside for a while, talking about the day's adventures, until we finally decided to turn in for the night. I fell asleep pretty quickly, my body tired from the day's activities, the sound of the ocean lulling me to sleep. But at some point in the night, I woke up. It wasn't from a noise or anything, just a strange feeling that something wasn't right. When I opened my eyes, I saw that my mom was sitting up in her sleeping bag. She was completely still, staring at something in the direction of the tent's entrance. The soft light of the moon filtered through the fabric, casting shadows that made the world inside our tent seem oddly unreal. My heart began to pound in my chest, sensing that something was off. I rubbed my eyes, trying to clear the sleep from them, and that's when I noticed what she was looking at. There, just outside the tent in the moonlight, was the silhouette of a person. It was hard to make out clearly, but it looked like an old woman, tall, thin, with long, wiry hair that seemed to hang down in ragged strands. The shape was crouching slightly, peering into our tent. I could see her face, pale and gaunt, and I froze. I had no idea who it was, but the image was terrifying. My heart thudded in my chest, and my throat tightened as panic began to spread through me. My mom remained completely still, not moving a muscle. I started to feel a wave of dread wash over me. What was she doing out there? Why wasn't she saying anything? Was it someone lost, or worse, was it someone who had been watching us? I could barely breathe, and the silence around me felt heavy, almost suffocating. I wanted to say something, but the words got caught in my throat. My eyes locked onto that shadowy figure, and the only thing I could focus on was how its eyes seemed to be staring right through the tent, through the fabric, as though it could see us. My mom still hadn't moved, and I could tell she was just as frozen in place as I was. It was the kind of terror that made you feel like you were trapped inside your own body, unable to react, to run, or to scream. My fingers gripped the edges of my sleeping bag as I strained to look, my eyes never leaving that figure outside. The only sound in the night was the soft rustle of the wind through the trees and the distant waves, but everything else was eerily quiet. Then I couldn't take it anymore. The fear built up to a point where I had to ask. I barely even knew what I was saying, my voice tight with fear. I whispered, asking my mom who it was, who was out there. The words barely left my mouth when I saw it. The figure shifted. It didn't run, but it suddenly stood up straight and turned away, taking slow, deliberate steps away from the tent. My breath caught in my throat as I watched it move, its long, disjointed silhouette blending with the shadows. Just as I was about to ask my mom again, the figure's movements became quicker, and with a sudden burst of speed, it darted off into the night, disappearing into the darkness. I gasped and sat up, staring at the place where the figure had been. My mom stayed still for a moment longer, still as a statue, her face pale and drawn. I could see her eyes now wide with shock, but also understanding. I felt the tension in the air ease, but I wasn't sure what to think. Who had that been? What was that thing? My mom finally moved, slowly, and pulled the edge of the tent open a little to look outside. The moon was still shining brightly, casting long shadows across the campsite, but there was nothing there now. The only sounds were the waves and the occasional call of a distant bird. It didn't make sense. We were completely alone on this part of the island. There was no one else camping nearby, and there was no way for someone to sneak up without being noticed. Yet, there it was, an old woman crouching in the moonlight, staring at us. My mom didn't say anything for a long while. Her eyes remained fixed on the dark stretch of beach, and for a moment, I thought she might be just as confused and scared as I was. Then, almost as if on instinct, she let the tent flap fall back down and crawled back into her sleeping bag. I followed her lead, trying to convince myself that whatever it was had simply been a trick of the light, a figment of our imaginations. But sleep didn't come easily after that. I lay there wide awake, listening to the sounds of the night, the wind, the waves, the creaks and groans of the trees around us. Every little sound felt amplified, as though the world was alive with movements just beyond our reach. I kept replaying the image of that old woman in my mind, trying to convince myself that it was nothing, just some kind of strange shadow. But deep down, I knew something had been off. The next morning, everything seemed to go back to normal. The sun was up, the air was warm, and the campgrounds had come to life with other families and their laughter. My parents didn't mention what happened during the night, and neither did I. But I couldn't shake the feeling that something had been out of place, something I couldn't explain. It wasn't until later in the day that we figured out what had happened. We had been camping on one of the island's many trails that the wild ponies used to get from the forest to the beach. The creatures were known for roaming freely across the island, and though we'd seen them many times before, we never realized just how close their trails came to our campsite. It turns out the old woman we had seen was not an old woman at all, but one of the wild ponies. The pony had probably been curious about the tents, or more likely, trying to find a path to the beach. The moonlight had made it appear like a person, and the shape of its mane, swaying in the wind, had looked like long, wild hair. When I had called out, the pony had been spooked and had run off, disappearing into the night. Once we understood that, everything made sense, but I couldn't help feeling shaken by how real it had seemed. That night, it felt like something else had been out there with us. Something watching, waiting. Even though I knew it was just a pony, I could never shake the image of that figure in the moonlight, staring into our tent. It was a reminder of how sometimes the mind can twist the ordinary into something far more frightening when you're in the wrong place at the wrong time. We packed up and left the campsite soon after. I don't think any of us truly felt at ease again after that. Every year we went camping, but I never could shake the memory of that night. The wild ponies of Assateague would always remind me of that strange, frightening moment. An eerie feeling that no matter how much we tried to make sense of it, some things just didn't add up. Even now, when I think back on it, I can still feel the chill in the air and hear the soft rush of hooves in the night. I remember it was supposed to be just another weekend trip. My siblings and I had been camping together for years, and this time was no different. We had our usual campsite by the lake, surrounded by dense trees and the kind of quiet that makes you forget about the noise of the real world. The sun was starting to set, casting a warm orange hue over the water, and we were all settling in for the night, making jokes and unpacking the car. The sky, however, wasn't quite as peaceful as the rest of the scene. It had started out clear, but as the evening stretched on, clouds started to roll in, thick, dark clouds that didn't look like they belonged. We'd been camping long enough to know that storms like this weren't unusual, especially around the lake, but this one felt different. The air was heavy, charged with something that none of us could put our finger on. We finished setting up the tent, and I remember feeling a slight unease in the pit of my stomach. The wind picked up suddenly, just a soft breeze at first, but it quickly grew stronger, rustling the trees and tugging at the edges of the tent. We laughed it off, thinking it was just a brief gust, but as the minutes passed, it was clear this wasn't just a light breeze. The temperature dropped sharply, and the sky darkened faster than we expected. By the time the sun had fully set, the storm was close, too close. The first strike of lightning hit the lake with such force that we jumped. It wasn't a normal flash of light either. This lightning seemed to crawl across the sky, splitting the clouds in a jagged, chaotic pattern that almost felt alive. The thunder followed immediately after, shaking the ground beneath us, making it hard to even hear the wind as it whipped through the trees. I could feel the tent shuddering in the wind. The poles bent and groaned, and the fabric of the tent flapped violently as the storm picked up intensity. That's when the roar started, low at first, like a distant growl, but it quickly grew louder, an unrelenting, almost deafening sound that seemed to be coming from everywhere at once. It was like the wind itself had turned into a beast, growling with a hunger I couldn't quite understand. We huddled together inside the tent, trying to stay calm. My siblings were already nervous, their voices shaking, but we were used to rough storms. This was different. The winds had reached a point where we could feel the tent lifting off the ground, the stakes pulling free from the earth. The thought crossed my mind that we might not even make it through this storm if we stayed here. The noise was so intense that I couldn't hear myself think, and the air felt thick, oppressive. I think it was my brother who first suggested we leave the tent and get to the car. He had seen the way the poles were bending and how the rain was coming in sideways, pelting us with force. We didn't argue. There was no time to. The roar of the wind was so loud by then that all we could do was grab our stuff in a rush, toss it in the back of the car, and scramble inside. The door barely closed before the wind nearly ripped it from our hands. Inside the car, it was worse. The storm seemed to focus its fury on us. The rain slammed against the windows, almost as if it was trying to break through. Lightning lit up the sky every few seconds, turning the world around us into blinding flashes of white and blue. The car was shaking, rattling in the intense wind, and we all sat there, silent, not knowing what to do. There was nothing we could do. The tent was gone now, completely flattened. We could see it out the window, the fabric billowing in the wind as it got caught on a nearby tree, twisting and snapping in the storm's grip. It didn't take long before we made a decision. The car wasn't going to be enough to protect us for long. The winds were still howling, and the storm wasn't letting up. We needed to get somewhere safer, somewhere solid. Grandpa's house wasn't far away, about a 20-minute drive, and that's where we decided to head. Driving in the storm was like trying to drive through a wall of water and wind. The roads were barely visible, and the car was rocked back and forth as we tried to stay on the path. I couldn't see much through the windshield, the wipers barely keeping up with the rain. Every time lightning struck, it illuminated the trees beside the road, making them look like twisted, skeletal hands reaching for the car. We all kept our eyes straight ahead, trying to focus on the road, but none of us said a word. The silence in the car was thick, the kind that comes when people know they've just narrowly escaped something terrifying, but are too scared to talk about it. We finally made it to Grandpa's house. It was a relief to pull into the driveway and see the lights on inside. It felt like we'd made it to safety, but the night didn't feel any less eerie. The wind continued to scream outside, rattling the windows, and the storm still sounded like it was right on top of us. Inside, Grandpa didn't ask many questions. He just took one look at us, soaked and wide-eyed, and let us in without a word. We stayed inside that night, sitting by the fire, staring into the flames. The storm raged on outside, but we were safe now. It wasn't until the next morning that we realized just how close we had come to something much worse. When we returned to the campground, it was a mess. The wind had taken trees down, blocking some of the roads, and the smell of wet earth and crushed leaves lingered in the air. We were greeted by a park ranger who informed us that a small tornado had touched down near our campsite the night before. No one had seen it, but the destruction was clear. Some of the trees had been snapped in half, and the roads were blocked with debris. The ranger didn't have an exact timeline of when the tornado had passed, but from the damage, we could tell it had been incredibly close to where we were. We spent the next few hours cleaning up our campsite. The tent was completely destroyed, the poles bent and snapped beyond repair. I couldn't find my sleeping bag. It was nowhere to be seen, and it wasn't until we left that I realized how strange that was. It should have been in the car or at least somewhere nearby, but it was gone. I don't know if it was blown away by the wind or swept into the trees with the tent, But it was the one thing that didn't make sense about the whole night. Everything else, the fear, the chaos, the way the storm had torn through the campsite, made sense. But losing my sleeping bag? That felt like one small detail that wouldn't let me forget the intensity of the storm. We left the campground that day, shaken but thankful to be alive. The storm had passed, the sun had come out, and life was starting to return to normal. But there was something about that night, something about how close we had come to being caught in that storm, that stayed with me long after. I've been camping many times since, but I've never felt quite the same way about storms again. And I've never forgotten about that sleeping bag. To this day, I have no idea what happened to it, but I know one thing for sure. Whatever we encountered that night was more than just a regular storm. It was a reminder of how fragile we are, how quickly things can change, and how little control we really have over the world around us. I was somewhere in central Oklahoma, camping alone in a clearing off a narrow dirt road that barely passed for a trail. It had been dry for a week straight, and I checked the forecast before setting out. It had looked clear, and I figured I'd get a couple quiet days to myself. I parked my truck at the edge of a barbed wire fence, packed in my gear, and hiked about 2 kilometers in until I found a spot that felt far enough away from everything. Flat, shaded, with just enough of a clearing to get a fire going and keep my small tent out of brush. I set up camp around early evening, made a small meal with my stove, and had a quick walk around the area. The forest was mostly post oak and blackjack trees, thick with underbrush but not impassable. As the sun dropped below the trees, I settled in and started a small fire. It was quiet, too quiet maybe. Not many insects chirping, not much wind in the trees. I just chalked it up to dry air and the remoteness of the place. I didn't bring any electronics except a flashlight and a basic emergency radio. I like disconnecting completely when I'm out there. That night, I went to bed around 9 p.m. The air had turned humid. I remember how heavy it felt. Still warm, but not a breeze anywhere. I unzipped the top vent on my tent just to get some airflow. I fell asleep fast, exhausted from the hike in. At some point in the night, maybe around 1 a.m., I woke up to thunder. Distant at first, low and rolling, then closer. I could tell it wasn't normal thunder. The frequency and sharpness of the cracks started to increase fast. I lay there for a moment, hoping it would blow over, but within minutes, the wind picked up hard, slapping the sides of the tent. I sat up. The air pressure had changed. It felt like the world outside was tightening around me. Then the lightning started. First, just 1 or 2 flashes. Then dozens. Then it was like someone was just flicking a giant light switch on and off every second. The forest lit up like a strobe light, and the thunder kept pace. Rolling, cracking, popping. It wasn't a storm anymore, it was a war zone. I turned on my flashlight and scrambled into my boots, deciding whether to make a run for the truck. But there was no way I was making it through thick brush and uneven ground in that kind of lightning. Every other flash showed the trees around me shaking. The roar started then, a low, grinding sound like an engine too big to be real, rumbling beyond the trees to the east. At first, I thought it was just wind, but it grew deeper, louder. It wasn't moving past me, it was circling. There was no siren, no warning, just that deafening, low roar and wind tearing through the woods. I dropped flat to the ground, my tent whipping around above me. The poles had come loose, and the fabric started to collapse over me. I pulled out and crouched next to a tree, covering my head with my arms. The air was full of dirt, debris, and this high-pitched whistle I still can't fully describe. Lightning never stopped. It kept going, like someone was holding down the button on a camera flash, lighting up everything around me. I could see the tops of trees swaying like grass. The sound was what terrified me the most. Steady, grinding, and angry. Tornado. It didn't pass directly over me. I'd learn later it had cut a path a couple kilometers to the south. But at the time, I didn't know that. I thought it might come straight for me. I stayed there on the ground for what felt like an hour, though it was probably 20 minutes. The wind kept up, then began to slow. Rain came next, thick, cold sheets of it slamming down through the canopy. My fire was long out by then, my tent half flattened. When the wind dropped to something less than terrifying, I crawled over to the tent and pulled out my emergency radio. It was still working, though barely. The local station had emergency tones going off. Tornado warnings lit up the whole county. They were tracking 3 cells moving across the region. One had touched down near where I was, damaging a couple farmsteads and flattening a stretch of woods. I didn't sleep again that night. I sat with my raincoat pulled over me, back against the thickest tree I could find, clutching the radio and waiting for updates. The rain kept up until morning. No sun came up, just a lighter kind of gray. The forest looked like it had been wrung out. Branches everywhere, some trees down. My tent was soaked and mostly useless. I packed up fast, didn't bother eating. My gear was wet and heavy, but I didn't care. I wanted out. The trail back to the truck was muddy and full of debris. A few trees blocked the way, but I climbed over or pushed around. I moved fast, adrenaline still driving me. When I got to the truck, the cab was wet inside from a cracked window, but otherwise fine. I sat in there for a while, hands gripping the wheel, staring out through the rain-streaked windshield, just breathing. Back in town, I found out more about the tornado. EF2, they said, touched down just after midnight, traveled northeast, and lifted before hitting the next county. No deaths, thankfully. A few homes damaged. I kept thinking about how that thing could have veered just slightly and gone right through my clearing. I didn't even have a ditch to hide in, just trees and luck. I don't camp during storm season anymore. Not out there, not alone. There's something about being completely exposed while the sky tears itself apart above you that changes how you think about nature. It's not just about being prepared, it's about knowing when not to test it. That night reminded me that the world doesn't care if you're out there alone, just trying to clear your head. Weather doesn't wait, and it doesn't warn you politely. Sometimes it just comes. That's what stuck with me the most. The suddenness. One moment, still air. The next, a roar loud enough to drown out your thoughts. Lightning so fast you can't even tell when it's dark. And no one around to help. Just you and the sky. I haven't gone back to that spot. I don't even look at that part of the map anymore. Some places don't need a second visit. Once was enough. It was early fall when we went out to camp. We picked a site near a lake, a little off the beaten path. Not totally remote, but quiet enough that you wouldn't hear car noise, and nobody could see your fire through the trees. The 4 of us had known each other since high school, and now in our late 20s, we tried to meet once or twice a year to get out and breathe a little. Get away from screens, cook meat over fire, talk about life. The trip started out normal. We drove out on a Thursday morning, hiked in with our gear, set up 2 tents a little ways back from the lake, and got the fire going. We brought wood, but also picked up sticks and brush from the forest floor. It all burned well enough. That night, the fire was strong. We drank, we laughed. The air was chilly enough that the fire felt good on our faces. We went to bed warm and in good spirits. The next day was uneventful. Hiked a little, tried fishing, made a big breakfast with eggs and bacon on the camp stove. I took a nap in the sun for a bit, then helped one of the guys saw some thicker logs we found lying in the brush. The air was crisp and clean, the forest alive with sound. That second night, we stayed up late. Fire going again. The temperature dropped more than we expected, and the wind picked up a bit. The fire was our only light. When it died down a bit, we all tossed in whatever extra wood we had. No one wanted to crawl into a freezing tent yet. It must have been close to 2 a.m. when it happened. We were sitting quietly. I remember that because it felt nice. Just the sound of the crackling fire and the wind rustling the branches above us. No one was really talking by that point. The night felt heavy, like the woods were pressing in around the fire circle. Everyone's face was glowing orange from the flames. We weren't drunk anymore, just tired. Then came the noise. It started as a small sound, like leaves being pushed aside. Not unusual in the woods, but when it continued and started getting closer, we all sat up. We turned our heads toward the sound. The forest was dark. I remember reaching for my flashlight and pointing it into the trees. Something was moving out there. The crunching got louder, then stopped. then started again. Not fast, not like an animal charging, just a steady shuffle. Then it stopped again. I could hear my own heartbeat. I remember glancing at the others and seeing that they were all holding their lights, all pointing in different directions. Then something stepped into the edge of the light. A man. No gear, no flashlight, no pack. He was barefoot. His clothes were dirty and torn. His eyes looked empty. I thought maybe he was homeless or had gotten lost. But he didn't say anything, didn't look at any of us. Just walked slowly into the firelight, not stopping, not changing pace, just steady. We froze. He kept walking, closer, right up to the fire. I stood up instinctively. One of the guys said something, maybe telling him to stop or asking if he was okay. But the man didn't react. He just kept walking. He stepped straight into the fire. He didn't scream. He didn't make a sound. Just collapsed into the flames like it was water. His body hit the logs and coals, and the sound it made was something I can't ever forget. A low thud, then sizzling, then the smell. It was sickly sweet at first, then sharp like burned hair and fat. We all started shouting. I remember falling backward, tripping on a rock or maybe a root. My flashlight flew out of my hand. He burned, not like in the movies. Took time. His clothes caught fire quickly. His skin blistered, peeled, cracked. We couldn't look away. He jerked a little, but not much. No screams, just that awful smell and the pop and hiss of cooking meat. We didn't know what to do. We just stood there, frozen. Eventually, someone grabbed the water jug and dumped it on the fire. It barely made a difference. The fire hissed and spat, but the flames didn't go out completely. His body was charred. One of his arms was curled underneath him. His legs were blackened and bent at odd angles. His face, it was melted, but somehow still human, still recognizable as a person. We didn't sleep. We couldn't. We stayed by the tents with headlamps on, checking the darkness over and over. That smell clung to everything. Our clothes, our skin. I wiped my face so many times, thinking I had ash on me. Maybe I did. Maybe I didn't. By morning, it was quiet. The fire was out, just a pile of blackened wood and wet ash. His body was still there, still real. We talked about what to do, if we should hike out and call someone. But we were hours from cell service. None of us wanted to leave the others behind. There was no way to carry the body. And truthfully, I think none of us wanted to carry that weight, the memory, the reality. So we buried him. We used our camping shovels and dug a shallow grave in the soft earth near the edge of the trees. The ground was damp. Took longer than we thought. The air was cold, and our hands were raw by the time we finished. We wrapped him in a tarp from one of the tents, carefully, like he was made of glass. None of us spoke. When we lowered him into the ground, it didn't feel real, like it was happening to someone else, like we were just going through motions. We covered him with dirt, smoothed it down with our boots. One of the guys put a flat stone at the head of the grave. We packed up and left that afternoon. No one said a word the whole hike back. We were too tired, too shaken. I remember staring at the ground as I walked, just watching my boots hit the trail over and over. When we got to the parking lot, it was like waking up. Civilization again. Cars, people, cell phones. We called the police from the first gas station we found. Told them what happened. Told them where to find the grave. They took our names, our statements. That was the end of it, mostly. They found the body, confirmed it was a suicide. No signs of foul play, no missing person match for a while. Months later, I got a call. They found out who he was. A man from a town 3 hours away. History of mental illness. Lived alone. No family left. They thanked us for burying him with care. That part stuck with me. We didn't know his name when we did it. Didn't know his story. But we gave him what we could. A grave. Quiet place. And even though that night will never leave me, even though I can still see his face in the flames when I close my eyes, I know we did the right thing. I haven't gone camping since. I don't think I will. Not deep woods, not away from people. There's something about seeing a man walk into fire with no fear, no sound, no hesitation. It stays with you, Every time I smell smoke now, I feel sick. And every time I see the stars above a dark tree-line, I remember that night. The cold, the silence, and the way the forest swallowed the sound, like it knew what was going to happen, like it had seen it before. It was late October when we planned the trip, right before the temperatures would start dipping too low for comfort. The idea was simple, just a weekend away from everything. Phones off, no work, no internet, just a few of us heading into the woods to get some quiet and clear our heads. We picked a place one of the guys had been to before. Nothing fancy, just a clearing tucked back in the forest about a mile off an old service road. You had to drive down a gravel path for a while, then park at a dead end near a small wooden gate that looked more decorative than functional. From there, it was a short hike in, not far, but just remote enough that you wouldn't see anyone else by accident. There were 4 of us. I'll leave names out, just regular guys in our late 20s. We'd done camping trips before, nothing survivalist or extreme, but we were comfortable being outdoors and knew how to handle ourselves. We brought the usual gear, tents, sleeping bags, a couple of camping chairs, a cooler of food, firewood, a small hatchet, flashlights, and extra layers. The weather was cool but dry. No rain in the forecast. We figured we had ideal conditions. We reached the clearing late in the afternoon. The sun was already getting low behind the trees, throwing shadows across the dirt and brush. It was quiet out there, really quiet. No distant hum of cars, no overhead planes, not even the wind. Just the occasional chirp from a bird or a few leaves scratching together high up in the canopy. We set up our tents on the far side of the clearing, away from where we planned to build the fire. The spot was flat and open, with tree cover thick enough around the edges to give us some shelter from wind, but not so dense that we felt boxed in. Once the tents were up, we got to work on the fire. Dug a shallow pit, lined it with stones, and stacked some dry logs and kindling. When the flame caught, it felt like the whole space lit up. We dragged our chairs around and settled in with some beers from the cooler, talking about everything and nothing, passing the time like you do when you're away from your regular life. That first night was uneventful. The fire crackled, the stars came out, and the woods stayed quiet. We heard a few animal sounds, probably a raccoon or a fox somewhere off in the trees, but nothing that made us uneasy. When we finally crawled into our sleeping bags, the forest was still and calm. I slept better than I had in weeks. The next day was just as peaceful. We took a short hike in the morning, following a small trail that led down to a dried creek bed. Found some animal tracks, mostly deer, maybe a coyote. Spent the afternoon gathering some extra wood and keeping the fire going. Made a simple lunch, lounged around, played cards. It was the kind of day that feels like it lasts forever, but in a good way. Like time slows down when there's no noise or pressure. As the sun dipped low again, the temperature started to fall. We threw on our jackets and huddled closer to the fire. Dinner was hot dogs cooked over the flames and some pre-made pasta we heated on a small camp stove. As night fell, we added more wood to the fire and watched the shadows grow longer. The woods felt a little different this time. Still calm, but heavier somehow. The wind picked up now and then, rustling the branches above us, and the trees creaked in that long, slow way that makes you notice how alone you are. We stayed up late, drinking slowly, letting the fire burn down low. It was around 2 in the morning when things started to feel strange. The fire was down to glowing coals with only a few low flames flickering up from time to time. We hadn't added wood in a while. Everyone was quiet. The cold had settled into our jackets and boots, and the only sounds were the crackling of the fire and the occasional sigh of wind through the trees. That's when we heard it. A rustling noise, not loud but not subtle either, came from the tree line to our right, sharp and quick, like something moving through dry leaves. Then it stopped. I sat up straighter in my chair and turned my head toward the sound. Another guy reached for his flashlight and pointed it in that direction. The beam of light cut through the dark like a sword, catching the mist that had started to hang in the air. But the beam landed on nothing, just trees and underbrush. A few seconds passed. Then the sound came again, this time from the opposite side. Another rustle, same quick movement through leaves and twigs. Another flashlight panned over, scanning side to side. Again, nothing. Just blackness beyond the reach of the light. It wasn't an animal walking slowly or carefully. It sounded like short bursts, running or darting. But nothing ever followed the noise. No figure, no shadow. Just sound and then silence. Then, without any warning, something small and dark shot out from the woods directly toward us. At first it looked like a rock or a chunk of wood someone had thrown, but it was moving too fast and too low to be anything like that. It rushed across the clearing in a blur, maybe 20 or 30 feet, straight through the middle of the circle where we sat, and dove headfirst into the glowing fire. We all jumped back at once. Chairs scraped dirt. One guy nearly fell over. The thing hit the fire and didn't stop. It didn't flinch or veer off. It plunged straight into the coals with a tiny thud and a sound like a muffled squeal, followed instantly by a violent, wet sizzle. The noise that came next is something I'll never forget. It was like meat being dropped onto a skillet, but thicker and sharper. There was a squirming motion, a flinch of black fur curling up from the heat. The flames licked up and around whatever it was, and for a moment the whole fire danced brighter and smelled strange, like burnt hair and raw meat mixed together. We stood there, frozen. The only sound was the fire, now alive again from the sudden burst of activity. No one said anything. No one moved. We just stared at the fire pit, our minds trying to catch up to what had just happened. After maybe a minute, one of us slowly stepped forward and poked the edge of the coals with a stick. What was left wasn't much. Just a small, blackened body, charred and shriveled, about the size of a fist. The shape was barely recognizable, but the little snout and short limbs were still there, just enough to make it clear what it had been. A mole. It had run straight out of the woods, full speed, and launched itself into our fire. No hesitation, no sign of injury, nothing chasing it. It hadn't tripped or fallen. It had aimed for the fire. We stood around for a long time after that, adding more wood almost out of habit, trying to process what we'd seen. None of us had ever heard of anything like that. An animal charging into a fire deliberately. Moles aren't aggressive. They barely even surface. They avoid light, noise, vibration. But this one had come right for the brightest, hottest thing in the woods, like it was drawn to it. The smell lingered. Burnt hair, cooked meat, something earthy underneath. We stayed up a while longer, poking at the fire, sipping whatever was left in our cups, pretending we were just tired and it hadn't happened. Eventually, one by one, we went back to our tents. I barely slept. The next morning, the sky was overcast, gray and still. The woods felt colder, heavier. Everything looked the same, but we were more aware now. We moved slower, spoke quieter, made coffee on the camp stove without lighting the fire again. It didn't feel right. When we cleaned up the fire pit, we found the mole's body still there, cooked through but still whole, blackened and curled in on itself. It hadn't been burned away, just seared, hardened. It sat among the ashes like it had been placed there. Nobody wanted to touch it, but none of us felt right leaving it either. So we buried it. We took a small folding shovel from one of the packs and dug a hole just past the clearing, near a tree with thick roots, maybe 6 inches deep. One guy picked the body up with a stick and dropped it in. We covered it with dirt, packed it down with our boots, and left a flat stone over the top. It sounds strange, but it felt necessary. Not because it was dramatic or symbolic, just because we didn't want to leave it like that. Something about what had happened, how unnatural it had felt, made us treat it like it mattered, like it meant something we didn't understand. And if we couldn't explain it, we could at least make it feel less wrong. We packed up quickly after that. Didn't sit around, didn't eat lunch, just loaded our gear and made our way back to the cars. The trail out felt steeper than it had coming in. The forest felt quieter in a way that wasn't peaceful anymore, like it was watching us. Driving home, the conversation was light, surface level, forced. None of us wanted to talk about what happened, not because we were scared, but because there was nothing to say. There was no explanation, no reason, just a strange, vivid moment that left an imprint we couldn't shake. I still think about it sometimes. What would make an animal do something like that? Was it sick? Confused? Afraid? Or was something in its brain wired wrong? Just enough to make it act against every instinct it had? Or maybe it wasn't the mole that was wrong. Maybe it was just something we don't see. Something out in the woods, old and quiet, that pulls on the edges of behavior in ways we don't recognize. Maybe things like that happen more often than we know. I haven't been back to that spot since. I still think about that night sometimes. It slips into my head when I'm driving late and the road is empty, or when I'm sitting by a fire and things get quiet. It creeps in when I'm trying to sleep, and the woods outside my window feel too still. It happened back when I was in high school. I was 17. It was the tail end of fall, right before winter really set in, and a group of us decided to go camping one weekend. There were 5 of us in total, me, 2 of my closest friends, and 2 guys we didn't know too well but had mutual friends with. They had all gone out together before on hiking trips, but this was the first time I joined. They told me we were heading up into the mountains, not too far, just a half-day hike into some bushland where people didn't usually go. No trails, no signs, just a remote spot they knew from a trip the year before. I remember packing light, just the basics. Tent, sleeping bag, small camp stove, a few freeze-dried meals, a headlamp, water bottles, extra socks. It was cold already, especially at night, but we figured we'd warm up by the fire and inside the sleeping bags. We weren't going out there for comfort. We just wanted to be away from everything. No phones, no people, no lights, just woods and silence. The hike itself was hard. We underestimated the incline, and there was a lot more brush than expected. Some places we had to scramble over rocks or duck through thick branches. The air got cooler as we went up, and by the time we reached the spot, some flat ground surrounded by tall trees with a little clearing for the fire, we were worn out. Nobody said it, but we all felt it. The way we dropped our packs and sat in the dirt kind of said it for us. We set up the tents, 2 of them, one for 3 people and another for 2. I was in the smaller one with a guy named Brian, who I didn't know well. But he seemed laid back and kept to himself, which suited me fine. We made a small fire, boiled some water, ate our meals, and sat around until the cold started to creep in again. It was peaceful in a way. No noise but the crackle of the fire and some distant rustling in the leaves now and then. The stars were out, more than I'd ever seen before. One of the other guys pointed out some constellations, but I was too tired to care. I pulled my jacket tighter and headed for the tent. Inside, it was cold but manageable. I got into my sleeping bag, pulled the zipper all the way up, and curled in on myself. I could hear the wind brushing through the trees, and every so often something would crack in the distance. A twig snapping, maybe a branch falling. But that's normal. Forests don't sleep. They make noise all night. It was probably after midnight when I woke up. The fire had burned out by then, and the temperature had dropped more. My sleeping bag felt thin and useless. My feet were cold, and my neck was stiff from the awkward position I had settled into. At first I thought that's why I woke up, but then I heard it. A sound. It wasn't loud, more like a faint step. Dry leaves being pressed into the ground. Just one. Then silence. I stayed still. I told myself it was nothing, just a small animal, possum or something, maybe even a bird hopping around. Then I heard it again. Another step, this time a little closer. Then another, and another, still not loud, not crashing or running, but steady, like something moving carefully, not in a straight line either. It was circling. I could tell by the sound. First the steps were behind the tent, then a few to the left, then near the front, off to the right. I lay there frozen, not out of fear at first, more like confusion. My mind tried to give it explanations. Maybe one of the other guys had gotten up to go to the bathroom. Maybe they were checking something near the fire pit. But the steps didn't sound like a person. People are heavier. Their steps are more rhythmic and the ground reacts differently. This was lighter, quieter, but still distinct. Then I heard it from more than one direction at once. Soft movements, almost timed. One to the front left of the tent, one behind, one off to the side, all around us. Nothing crashing, nothing fast, just there, like they had come out of nowhere. I waited to hear the guys in the other tent, waited for someone to speak up, or for a flashlight beam to cut through the fabric. But nothing. It was dead silent except for the steps. I reached slowly for my flashlight, careful not to make noise. I found it near the top of my sleeping bag, switched it on, and the beam lit up the inside of the tent. I wanted to unzip the tent and shine it out, but something in me hesitated. If I didn't look, I could still pretend it was nothing. But the sounds kept coming, a little closer, still slow, still cautious. I finally sat up, pulled the zipper on the tent door halfway down, and stuck my head out just enough to shine the light outside. At first, I didn't see anything. Just the trees, the low fire pit, the outline of the other tent. The beam cut through the dark like a tunnel. Then I saw them. Dozens of them. Not low to the ground. Not small. Tall. Higher than my own height. They shimmered faintly in the light. Some stood still, others blinked and shifted. Their shapes were hard to make out at first. Too dark, but the eyes were unmistakable. My heart dropped into my stomach. They weren't close enough to touch the tent, but they weren't far either. 10, maybe 15 feet away, surrounding us. Then one moved. I saw its shape clearer, a long body, thin legs, large ears. A deer. Then another one moved, and another. All deer, but not like the ones you see at the edge of the road or grazing in open fields. These were bigger, muscular, alert, not scared, not curious, just watching. I stared at them, flashlight beam moving from one to another. My hands were shaking. I didn't understand what they were doing, why they were so still, why they were there at all. One of them stepped forward, slow and careful, just a few feet, then stopped again. Kept its eyes on me the entire time. I thought of every horror story I'd ever read about people getting lost, found torn apart, weird animal attacks. My mind spiraled. I finally whispered inside to Brian, not loud, just enough to hope he'd wake up. But he didn't move. I didn't try again. I didn't want to make noise. I pulled the zipper back up, lay back down, turned the flashlight off, and stared at the roof of the tent. The sounds didn't go away for a long time. I listened as they shifted in the leaf litter, moving back and forth, around us, quiet but constant. Once, one of them brushed against the outside of the tent. Just a soft sound, fabric moving. I held my breath until it passed. Eventually, I must have fallen asleep. I don't remember it. I just remember waking up again, this time to light. The sun was out, low but bright. I sat up and unzipped the tent. The clearing looked normal. The fire pit, the trees, the other tent. Nothing looked touched or out of place, except for the tracks. All around the tents, the ground was littered with hoof prints. Deep, clear impressions in the soft dirt and leaves. So many of them, like a stampede, had walked around us in circles for hours. One of the other guys woke up then, unzipped their tent, and came out stretching. I didn't say anything right away. I just stared at the ground. Eventually, they noticed too. We didn't need to talk about it. Everyone saw it. Everyone felt the same thing I did. It wasn't normal. We packed up quietly, didn't eat, didn't even light the fire again. Just took down our tents, stuffed everything in our bags, and started hiking back. The hike felt longer going down, heavier. Nobody said much. We didn't stop to rest. Back at the car, we tossed our gear in the trunk and got inside. The road back to town felt strange too, like we had crossed into some different place when we went into those woods, and we were just now finding our way back out. I've been camping many times since then. I still love the quiet, the fire, the stars. But I never forget that night. The way they moved, the way they watched. It wasn't a ghost story or a monster in the woods. Just deer. But not how you'd expect them. Not how you'd want them. Just standing there, silent, tall, in the dark. Like they knew something we didn't. Like we were the ones being studied. Sometimes nature doesn't need to be violent to be terrifying. Sometimes it just needs to remind you that it's not yours. That you don't belong in every place you step. That night reminded me, and I don't camp without a fire burning through the night anymore. I had been planning a solo camping trip for a while. I needed to clear my head, get away from people for a bit, and just spend some time in nature without any noise. No traffic, No notifications. Nothing. I picked a spot I had come across on a hiking trip months earlier. It was off a dirt track that hardly anyone used, tucked away in a patch of dry bushland in regional New South Wales. The ground there was covered in dry leaves and sticks, so you could always hear if something or someone was moving nearby. That was partly why I chose it. I liked the idea that I could hear anything coming. I packed light, a 2-person tent, my sleeping bag, a small cooktop, a cooler with a few days' worth of food, and the basics: knife, torch, first aid, that kind of stuff. I arrived at the site late in the afternoon. The sky was clear and the air was dry. Typical bush weather. I found the exact clearing I remembered. It wasn't huge, just enough space to pitch a tent and sit around without brushing up against scrub or low-hanging limbs. Trees surrounded it on all sides. You couldn't see the road or hear any cars from there. It was quiet in that empty kind of way that only the bush can be. I set up the tent quickly and made myself a cup of tea on the gas burner. I watched the sun drop behind the treetops and listened to the cicadas and the occasional rustle from a possum or something similar in the trees. The sounds were familiar, small animals doing their thing as night crept in. Nothing unusual. I turned in early, probably around 8:30 or 9 o'clock. It got cold fast. That type of dry inland cold that really settles on your skin once the sun's gone. I zipped up the tent, slid into my sleeping bag, and shut my eyes. I drifted off to sleep, listening to the wind moving through the gums. I don't know what time it was when I heard it. I woke up in that half-alert way where you're not sure if it's real or a dream. I lay there, breathing slowly, listening. The bush was still. No insects, no wind, no rustling. Just dead silence. That's what made it stand out. The sound I heard didn't belong in the stillness. It was a plopping sound, not a snap or a rustle. Just a dull, soft thud, like something heavy and wet being dropped onto the ground. Came from just outside the tent. First, I didn't move. I just lay there with my ears pricked. I thought maybe a branch had dropped, but I hadn't heard any other noise. No crunching leaves, no movement, just the plop. Then nothing. I stayed completely still, listening. I waited to hear footsteps or some kind of animal movement. Nothing. No sniffing, no scraping. Just silence again. After a few minutes, I reached for the torch and clicked it on, but I didn't unzip the tent. I just stared at the nylon, listening. I figured it was nothing. Maybe something fell from a tree. I told myself that and managed to fall back asleep eventually, though I kept the torch in my hand. When I woke up again, it was light. The sun had come up and the tent was glowing faintly orange from it. I felt stiff and cold, like I hadn't really rested. I lay there for a moment, letting the fog clear from my head. Then I remembered the noise from the night before, that soft plop, and the stillness afterward. I unzipped the tent and crawled out into the chilly morning air. The ground was dry and littered with leaves, sticks, the usual bush debris. I stood up and stretched. That's when I saw it. About a meter from the entrance to the tent, sitting directly on the leaf litter, was a kangaroo's head. It had been cleanly removed from the body. There was no ragged flesh or blood smeared across the ground. The fur was matted only slightly, and its eyes were open, staring up toward the trees. Its tongue lolled slightly out of its mouth, and there were a few flies beginning to gather around the edges. It was fresh, very fresh. I froze. It hadn't been there when I set up camp. I was sure of that. I had cleared the spot where my tent sat, kicked the leaf litter back, and scanned the ground. That kind of thing would have stood out. I looked around slowly, scanning the trees, the scrub, everything. Nothing moved. Nothing made a sound. My heart started pounding. My first thought was that someone had brought it there. Someone had placed it deliberately next to my tent during the night. That meant someone had walked right up to me while I was asleep. They hadn't made a sound on the dry leaves and twigs, and they had gotten close enough to put a severed animal head next to me without waking me up fully. The plopping sound came back to me. That was it. That's what I'd heard. That dull drop. The sound of the head being placed on the ground. I scanned again, faster this time. Nothing. No tracks that I could see. No drag marks from a body. No blood trail. Just the head. I didn't waste any more time. I packed up my tent in under 5 minutes. I didn't even bother rolling it properly. I just stuffed it into the back of the car and threw my gear in around it. I didn't eat or make tea. I didn't even take a proper look around the area. I just got in the driver's seat and left. The drive out felt like it took forever. Every time the track dipped or turned, I half expected to see someone standing there. I watched the rearview mirror more than I should have. My hands shook on the wheel, and I didn't feel like I could really breathe until I hit bitumen again and left the bush behind. When I got home, I locked the door and just sat on the couch for a while. I didn't tell anyone about it for a long time. It sounded insane when I thought about it out loud. But I know what I saw, and I know what I heard. Later that week, I looked into local wildlife attacks, even illegal hunting. I couldn't find anything recent in that area. No reports of mutilated animals. No missing hikers or strange sightings. Just nothing, like it hadn't happened. But I knew someone had been there. It wasn't an animal. No dingo decapitates a kangaroo and carries just the head to a random tent without leaving a trail. And if it had been an animal, there would have been blood. There would have been a mess. There wasn't. I think someone was already out there when I arrived, watching. Maybe they'd been living rough in that bushland. Maybe they were just passing through. I don't know. But whoever it was, they wanted me to see that head. They wanted me to wake up and know that they'd come right up to my tent without me noticing. That they were close enough to touch me if they'd wanted to. And they wanted to remind me that the bush, as quiet and peaceful as it seems, isn't always empty. I haven't camped alone since then. I still go hiking sometimes, and I'll do day trips into the bush. But once the sun starts going down, I make sure I'm already driving home. There's something about being completely alone out there, in places where help is hours away, that doesn't feel peaceful anymore. Feels like you're being watched, because maybe you are.